America is full of places that look incredible in photos and feel completely different the moment you actually show up. Every year, millions of people plan trips around destinations they've seen online, only to land and immediately wonder what went wrong. Today, we're counting down 10 places in America tourists regret visiting instantly. Place 10, Times Square, New York City. Let's start with the most obvious offender on this list. Times Square is probably the most photographed intersection on the planet. Billboards the size of buildings, neon lights everywhere, the energy of one of the world's great cities buzzing around you. On paper, it sounds electric. In reality, the experience of actually standing there is something close to being trapped inside a migraine. The crowds alone are staggering. On a normal day, somewhere around 330,000 people pass through Times Square. That's not a typo. Nearly 1/3 people pushing past each other in a space where walking in a straight line becomes a genuine achievement. In peak tourist season, that number climbs even higher. Then there's the noise, the smells, the relentless parade of people dressed in grimy character costumes, a Elmo that looks like it's been through several rough winters, a Spider-Man aggressively asking for a tip photo, and at least 3 different versions of the Statue of Liberty standing within 20 feet of each other. These costumed characters have been a documented nuisance for years. The city has tried repeatedly to regulate them. It hasn't entirely worked. One traveler on TripAdvisor put it bluntly, "I stood there for about 4 minutes before I wanted to leave. There's nothing to do except get jostled and spend money." The shops inside and around Times Square are mostly chains you can find in any American mall. Overpriced, unremarkable, and clearly designed to extract money from people who are too overwhelmed to walk anywhere else. A bottle of water in that area will cost you more than it has any right to. Scams are not uncommon either. Visitors have reported being handed CDs by people claiming to be independent musicians, only to be aggressively demanded payment afterward. Unauthorized ticket brokers work the sidewalks. Pickpocketing in densely packed areas is a documented issue. The NYPD maintains a strong presence, but in a crowd that large, things happen. What Times Square actually is, stripped of the mythology, is a very busy commercial intersection. The lights are real. The scale is real. The fact that every major broadcast network seems to place their studios there is real. But the magic that people imagine from movies and New Year's Eve broadcasts tends to dissolve the second you're standing in it at 2 p.m. on a Tuesday in August, surrounded by strangers elbowing you from every direction. Midtown Manhattan, just a few blocks in any direction, is a completely different experience. Grand Central Terminal, the New York Public Library, Bryant Park, all of these are within walking distance and none of them feel like the inside of a vending machine. New York City itself is genuinely remarkable. Times Square is the part that mostly just tests your patience. Place 9. The Hollywood Walk of Fame. Los Angeles. Hollywood carries a particular kind of promise. The name alone conjures images of glamour, history, stardom. People fly across the world to stand on that famous stretch of sidewalk on Hollywood Boulevard and see the names embedded in the stars beneath their feet. What they find instead is a strip of concrete running through a neighborhood that, to put it diplomatically, has seen better decades. The Walk of Fame runs along Hollywood Boulevard and Vine Street for about 1.3 miles. There are more than 2,700 stars embedded in the sidewalk, honoring figures from film, television, radio, theater, and music. The concept is genuinely cool. The execution of the surrounding environment is a different story. The area directly around the Walk of Fame is dense with souvenir shops selling mass-produced merchandise, aggressive street performers, and vendors hawking celebrity bus tours. The sidewalks themselves are often crowded and occasionally in poor condition. Some of the surrounding blocks have struggled with issues related to homelessness and crime, which the city has worked to address but which continue to shape the experience for visitors. People arrive expecting Sunset Boulevard glamour. They find a street that feels more like a theme park version of itself, minus the rides. It's also worth noting that the stars on the Walk of Fame are not free. Honorees, or their studios and record labels, pay a fee for the privilege of having their name embedded in the sidewalk. As of recent years, that fee sits around $50,000. The star is considered a marketing expense. Knowing that, as you crouch down to photograph the name of a beloved actor, embedded in a stretch of pavement next to a vape shop, changes the atmosphere somewhat. A former visitor summed it up online. "I flew all the way from London to see this. I spent about 10 minutes walking around, found the star I was looking for, took a photo, and then didn't know what else to do." To be fair, a few specific sites nearby, the TCL Chinese Theater, the Dolby Theater where the Oscars are held, are legitimately worth seeing up close. The Pantages Theater is a beautiful building. The Egyptian Theater, one of the first grand movie palaces in Hollywood history, opened in 1922 and still operates. Those things have genuine character, but the Walk of Fame itself, as an experience, tends to be less than the sum of its famous parts. Place 8. South of the border, South Carolina, North Carolina border. If you've ever driven along Interstate 95 through the Carolinas, you've seen the signs, hundreds of them, stretching for miles in both directions, advertising a roadside attraction called South of the Border with the kind of relentless enthusiasm that borders on psychological pressure. Pedro, the mustachioed mascot, shows up on billboards dozens of times before you ever arrive. The signs are funny, in an old-fashioned road trip kind of way. They've been a fixture of American highways since the 1950s, and for generations of travelers, the relentless buildup creates genuine anticipation. Then you pull in. South of the Border opened in 1950 as a beer stand near the North Carolina-South Carolina state line, founded by Alan Schaefer. It expanded over the decades into a sprawling complex with a motel, restaurants, a gas station, mini golf, fireworks stands, and a tower you can ride to the top of. At its peak, in the mid-20th century, it was a legitimate American roadside landmark, pulling in enormous numbers of travelers who were stopping for a break and a souvenir. Schaefer was a savvy businessman who understood that before the interstate highway system was fully developed, road travelers needed stopping points, and he built an empire on that premise. The current version of the attraction is a shadow of what it once was. Many of the shops and restaurants have closed. The facilities feel dated in a way that goes beyond charming nostalgia into genuine neglect. The famous signs still appear up and down I-95, but what they're advertising no longer matches the spectacle they promise. The mascot Pedro has also drawn increasing criticism over the years for relying on ethnic stereotyping rooted in mid-century sensibilities that haven't aged particularly well. The imagery is a product of its era, which is worth understanding even if it doesn't make the murals any less jarring. For some people, the faded grandeur has its own appeal. There's a certain melancholy beauty to watching something that was once genuinely popular slowly fade. But if you're stopping here expecting an attraction, you may walk away wishing you just kept driving. Place 7. Bourbon Street, New Orleans. For the wrong reasons. New Orleans is a magnificent city. The food alone justifies the flight. The music scene is authentic and extraordinary. The architecture in the French Quarter is unlike anything else in America. The history runs deep. And then there's Bourbon Street. Bourbon Street is not the real New Orleans. It is, essentially, what happens when a city's most famous block becomes completely given over to the tourist economy, and every establishment on it optimizes for selling large novelty drinks to people who are in town for a bachelorette party or a convention. During the day, it smells like the floor of a stadium the morning after a game. During the night, it smells like that but with more neon. The drinks are enormous and weak, the bars are loud, the crowds press against you, the ground is sticky in ways you prefer not to investigate. The thing is, none of the food you're eating on Bourbon Street is representative of New Orleans cuisine. The city has some of the most celebrated food culture in the entire country. Gumbo, crawfish étouffée, beignets, po' boys, muffuletta, charbroiled oysters. Restaurants a 10-minute walk from Bourbon Street are doing things with a cast iron skillet that will change how you think about food. But Bourbon Street's blocks are dominated by bars selling frozen daiquiris in yard-long plastic cups, and the food options cluster around fried things served in paper boats. It's not a culinary experience. It's a concession stand that runs for several blocks. None of this is a secret. People know what Bourbon Street is before they go. The problem is that many visitors to New Orleans spend most of their time on or near Bourbon Street without venturing far enough into the actual city to experience what makes New Orleans genuinely special. They leave having checked a box, without having actually seen the place. One food writer described Bourbon Street as a place that exists purely to make sure you don't accidentally have a real New Orleans experience. That might be a little harsh, but if your entire New Orleans trip stays within a 2-block radius of Bourbon Street, you've essentially visited a theme park with better humidity and worse ventilation. Place 6. Niagara Falls, New York. American side. Niagara Falls is one of the most powerful natural spectacles in North America. Nearly 3 million gallons of water tumble over the falls every second. The sound carries for miles. Standing near the edge and feeling the mist hit your face is genuinely awe-inspiring. Here's the problem. The best views are almost entirely from the Canadian side. The American side of Niagara Falls, despite the natural wonder literally sitting right there, has struggled with urban decay for decades. The surrounding city of Niagara Falls, New York, has faced serious economic challenges, population decline, poverty, and a built environment that doesn't quite match the grandeur of the waterfall it's supposed to showcase. The city was once a thriving industrial hub, in part because of hydroelectric power generated by the falls. When manufacturing declined in the region, the economy contracted significantly and never fully recovered. Visitors who cross into Ontario, Canada, immediately notice the difference. The Canadian side has developed a full tourism infrastructure, observation decks with sweeping views of both the Horseshoe Falls and the American Falls, a walkway along the waterfall edge, Warfwall, restaurants with actual views, hotels positioned to maximize the sightline, and a city center that is genuinely capitalized on its proximity to one of the most visited natural attractions in the world. The American side has Niagara Falls State Park, which is the oldest state park in the United States and was designed in part by Frederick Law Olmsted, the same landscape architect behind Central Park. Some areas of the park are beautiful and worth walking through. The Maid of the Mist boat tour, which runs from both sides, is an outstanding experience that puts you directly in the mist at the base of the falls. But the overall experience, particularly if you haven't planned carefully, can be disorienting when you realize you're standing next to one of the great natural wonders of the world, and the infrastructure around you feels more like a city still figuring out what to do with its greatest asset. The falls themselves are extraordinary. The American side infrastructure surrounding them is where the regret often sets in. Place 5. The Alamo, San Antonio, Texas. Remember, the Alamo is one of the most famous phrases in American history. The 1836 Battle of the Alamo, in which a small group of Texan defenders held off Mexican forces for 13 days before being overwhelmed, has become a defining story in American mythology. The site carries enormous historical and cultural weight. It also sits in the middle of downtown San Antonio, surrounded by a souvenir district, a Ripley's Believe It or Not, a wax museum, and a Hard Rock Cafe. The disconnect is jarring. Visitors expecting a solemn, expansive historical site find a compound that is considerably smaller than popular imagination suggests. The main chapel is roughly 75 feet wide, hemmed in by commercial tourism on all sides. There's no dramatic approach, no sweeping open ground. You essentially walk out of a busy urban street directly into a small preserved area. The interior of the Alamo itself is genuinely interesting. The artifacts, the history, the preserved chapel. For someone who takes time to engage with the exhibits, there's real substance here. The Alamo is a legitimately important historical site, and the Daughters of the Republic of Texas maintained it for over a century before management was transferred to the Texas General Land Office in 2015. There is ongoing work to improve the grounds and expand the visitor experience, but the exterior setting, the scale relative to the legend, and the carnival-like atmosphere of the commercial district immediately surrounding it have left many visitors feeling like something was lost between the history books and the actual experience. "I expected something grand and quiet," one visitor wrote. "What I got was a small building between a Ripley's and a gift shop." San Antonio itself, to be clear, is a wonderful city to visit. The River Walk, the network of walkways along the San Antonio River lined with restaurants, shops, and hotels, is a genuinely charming place to spend time. The historic missions south of downtown, which are part of a UNESCO World Heritage Site, offer a far more immersive and peaceful historical experience than the Alamo's current commercial surroundings allow. The Alamo is worth visiting. It just may not be worth making the centerpiece of your entire trip the way marketing materials tend to suggest. Place 4. Venice Beach, Los Angeles. Venice Beach has a mythology. Jack Kerouac wrote about it. The counterculture claimed it. The bodybuilders, the murals, the boardwalk, the ocean. For decades, it represented a particular kind of California freedom that people wanted to see for themselves. The boardwalk is still there. The murals are still there. The famous Muscle Beach outdoor gym still draws people who want to lift weights in public near the ocean. Street performers, skaters, and vendors line the path the way they always have. The ocean itself is exactly where it always was. And on a clear afternoon, the light hitting the Pacific from the Venice boardwalk can be genuinely beautiful. But the surrounding environment has changed significantly. Venice Beach became one of the most visible examples in America of a tourist destination that exists alongside a large, entrenched homeless encampment. At the peak of the encampment in 2021, hundreds of people were living in tents along the boardwalk, a situation that drew national attention and intense debate about housing policy and the use of public space in Los Angeles. The city's response, and the underlying causes, became a national story in their own right. City and county officials conducted clearings in mid-2021, and the situation has shifted somewhat since then. But the underlying challenges have not been resolved, and depending on when and where you visit, the experience can range from manageable to deeply uncomfortable for people who weren't prepared for it. Part of what makes Venice Beach difficult to assess as a tourist destination is that the gap between expectation and reality is particularly wide there. The bohemian, sun-drenched version of Venice Beach has been sold in movies, television shows, and travel features for decades. What visitors find when they arrive reflects a city dealing with very real problems that don't fit neatly into the postcard version of California. The beach itself, away from the boardwalk and south towards Santa Monica, can still be genuinely beautiful. But the Venice Beach of the imagination and the Venice Beach of current reality are not the same place, and the distance between them is wide enough to produce genuine shock. Place 3. Mall of America, Bloomington, Minnesota. The numbers are genuinely impressive. The Mall of America covers 5.6 million square feet. It has more than 500 stores. It contains a full indoor amusement park, Nickelodeon Universe, with roller coasters. It has a hotel attached to it, an aquarium, a miniature golf course. People travel from across the country and around the world specifically to visit it. And then they arrive and realize that it is, at its core, a very large mall. The amusement park is legitimately fun, particularly for families with children. The aquarium is decent. There's a comedy club. There are escape rooms. Wedding ceremonies have been held inside the mall. It's a fully self-contained environment designed to keep you inside for an entire day. And on that metric, it largely succeeds. But a significant portion of the international visitors who make the trip to Bloomington, Minnesota, specifically for the Mall of America, leave underwhelmed because the retail experience, the part that makes up the vast majority of the space, is composed largely of stores that exist in shopping malls across the entire country. A Gap is a Gap. A Foot Locker is a Foot Locker. The merchandise doesn't change because the building housing it is enormous. The cultural gap also catches some foreign visitors off guard. Travelers from Europe or Asia who have heard about the Mall of America as a symbol of American consumer culture sometimes arrive expecting something more experiential or culturally distinct. What they find is a well-organized American mall with a roller coaster in the middle, which is interesting for about 45 minutes, and then becomes a very large place to walk around. There's also the matter of getting there. The Mall of America is in Bloomington, Minnesota, which is not a place most people would otherwise visit in December. Minnesota in winter is not shy about its temperatures. The experience of flying to Minneapolis, riding a light rail train to a suburb, and spending the day inside a building because going outside is inadvisable is a particular kind of vacation that rewards people who know exactly what they're signing up for. The Mall of America absolutely delivers for families looking for a day of rides and activities. As a destination for adults hoping to experience something genuinely singular, it tends to fall short of its considerable reputation. Place 2. Roswell, New Mexico. In the summer of 1947, something crashed in the desert outside Roswell, New Mexico. The U.S. Army Air Force initially described it as a flying disc, before quickly revising the statement to a weather balloon. The incident became one of the most debated events in modern American history, spawning decades of speculation about what the military actually recovered and whether it was extraterrestrial in origin. The official explanation, confirmed in a 1994 Air Force report, is that what crashed was a high-altitude balloon from a classified government surveillance program called Project Mogul. The story of a UFO crash and recovered alien bodies has no credible supporting documentation. That hasn't stopped Roswell from going all in on the mythology. The town has constructed an entire identity around the alien narrative. There's the International UFO Museum and Research Center, alien-themed restaurants, bars, and souvenir shops line the main street. Streetlights are shaped like alien heads. Every July, a UFO festival draws tens of thousands of visitors who come dressed in costumes and spend a weekend celebrating something that the preponderance of available evidence suggests didn't happen the way the mythology describes. People who arrive genuinely hoping to engage with history or even credible paranormal research often find instead a gift shop economy dressed up as a tourist attraction. The museum, which charges admission, is largely composed of newspaper clippings, promotional displays, and exhibits that feel more like enthusiasm than scholarship. One visitor described it as the world's largest souvenir shop, with a Wikipedia article about UFOs inside. Roswell, the actual town, has a population of around 48,000 people and exists as a real functioning New Mexico city with agriculture, oil production, and a history that predates the 1947 incident. The New Mexico Military Institute is located there. The Bitter Lake National Wildlife Refuge nearby is genuinely worth seeing if you're making the trip. The Roswell Museum and Art Center has a surprisingly strong collection of Peter Hurd's work and a section dedicated to Robert Goddard, the rocket scientist who conducted research in Roswell during the 1930s. That's a legitimate piece of scientific history that tends to get completely overshadowed by the green alien merchandise. For people who enjoy campy Americana, Roswell is actually a fine time. The self-awareness of the town can be charming, but for those who make the long drive across the New Mexico desert, expecting genuine mystery or historical substance, the experience is almost entirely built on a story the evidence doesn't actually support. Place 1. Times Square on New Year's Eve, New York City. We started with Times Square on a regular day. This entry is about the specific, once-a-year version that people build entire trips around. The Times Square New Year's Eve ball drop is one of the most iconic events in the world. The tradition began in 1907. Each year, roughly 1 million people gather in Times Square to watch a 12-foot geodesic sphere descend the final 60 feet of a flagpole at One Times Square as the clock approaches midnight. The broadcast looks spectacular. Confetti, celebrities, the roar of the crowd, the ball glittering against the New York skyline. Here is what the experience of actually being there looks like for most attendees. You must arrive hours early. Many experienced attendees recommend getting into position by early afternoon on December 31st to secure a spot with any kind of sightline to the ball. Once you're in your designated pen, you cannot leave. There are no bathrooms. There are no food vendors allowed inside the secured areas. The temperature in New York at the end of December is regularly well below freezing. You stand in one place in the cold for up to 8 or 10 hours without the ability to get food, use a restroom, or sit down. The ball itself, when it finally drops, is visible from your position for approximately 60 seconds. Law enforcement estimates have consistently placed the crowd at around 1 million people in the general Times Square area. The secured viewing pens hold a fraction of that number. The majority of people who come to watch the ball drop in Times Square are standing many blocks away, watching it on large screens, in the cold, unable to see One Times Square at all. The logistics involved are not small. Getting into and out of Midtown Manhattan on New Year's Eve requires planning that most tourists don't fully anticipate. Subway access near Times Square is restricted. streets are closed in a wide radius. Rideshare pickups become nearly impossible in the immediate area. The crowd dispersal after midnight, with 1 million people trying to leave at the same moment, is an experience unto itself. Hotel rooms in Midtown Manhattan on December 31st are priced accordingly. A room that costs $200 on a normal night in January can cost $800 or more on New Year's Eve. Restaurants require reservations made months in advance and charge fixed menus at prices that reflect the occasion. The entire economic apparatus of Midtown recalibrates itself around the event in ways that the first-time visitor may not have budgeted for. One New York-based journalist wrote about the experience. "I've lived here for 20 years. I did it once. You feel like a very cold sardine who waited all day to watch something on television that you could have seen more clearly from your couch." The ball drop as a broadcast event is genuinely moving. The ball drop as an in-person experience is one of the most effectively marketed pieces of discomfort in American tourism. And that's our list. 10 places that look one way in the brochure and feel entirely different once you're standing there with a lukewarm cup of coffee and a crowd pressing in on all directions. None of these places are necessarily without merit. Some of them have genuinely interesting things to offer if you approach them with the right expectations. But expectations are exactly the problem. America does a remarkable job of selling its landmarks. What happens between the selling and the arriving is where regret tends to live. If this video saved you from standing in a Times Square souvenir shop at noon in August, wondering what went wrong, then it did its job. Hit the like button if you found this useful, and subscribe so you don't miss the next one.